FromSoft's Sekiro Shadows Die Twice was a game that innovated in so many different ways, and in my opinion, from a purely game design philosophy, is one of the greatest achievements in the industry's history because of one simple moment in the game, which I'll get into, which completely encompassed every single player's experience, whether you're an old or new player of FromSoft and the Soul series titles prior. And I remember when the trailers first came out and the murmurs of what kind of game it was going to be, the general sentiment following Dark Souls 3 was that we needed something innovative and new and different from Software to really keep people invested. You know, Dark Souls 3 was the natural conclusion to the series. We had Bloodborne as well as a sort of spin-off title. So Sekiro, when we heard the announcement of being a completely new IP, we expected some change. And when the initial reaction to something like there was no customization, no build crafting, which is what FromSoft had really focused on in pretty much all of their games before, there was a lot of understandable and natural concern from a lot of players, myself included, that this was going to be a game that was perhaps less ambitious, perhaps too different and distant from their previous work. But once we got into the game and it fully released back in 2019, I think we really started to understand what kind of game this was going to be. Because the reason I love Sekiro so much, and the reason I think the design is genius, the phrase I would use is adapt or die. And it sounds harsh, and that's what the series, the Soul series, has been known for before, but I don't think it had ever been more prevalent than in Sekiro. Because whether you're an old player or a new player, as I mentioned prior, everyone seemed to play the game initially, when on the first few bosses and the first general areas of the game, the same. You know, with such a large focus on dodge rolling and blocking, a more sort of passive turn-based waiting your turn approach to the dance and rhythm of a boss fight. That was what we were used to and accustomed to as players. So when Sekiro completely sort of wiped the slate clean and flipped the script entirely, you know, we had to adapt, and nothing encompasses that more than the Genichiro boss fight, or the second time you face him, because if you haven't played the game, you fight him as the very first boss in the game, and he intentionally destroys the hell out of you. You basically don't stand a chance if you haven't played the game before. And you eventually rematch him later on in the game with a little bit more knowledge, with a bit more skills and a bit more upgrades. But the reality is, finding victory is still down to you as the player and your skill set, regardless of any upgrades. And it's the one moment in the game where it does not compromise. It does not allow you a chance at beating a boss or an enemy through playing it a different way. The game says you have to win this way, and you have to, otherwise you can't beat the rest of the game. You aren't going to get through here. And in most games, that's a philosophy which I don't like. You know, I think in most games, you should be able to have the freedom to experiment, freedom to approach a title or an obstacle or a challenge in whatever way you want. But I think in the specific laser-focused design philosophy of Sekiro, I think it's total genius, because every single player, every single one who has adapted and came through that single boss fight on the other side victorious, realizes the genius of what Sekiro is all about, which is the adapt or die philosophy, which is to take the front-footed approach, be aggressive, and treat the game almost like a rhythm title, because you have to deflect, attack, and deflect. And it's almost a timing-based approach, which is forcing the player to take the front foot rather than be passive in the same way that many of the Souls games did. And once that sort of signal clicks in the brain, I think that's what makes it so genius, is that it wasn't just for me. It's not something that I'm only speaking from experience as specific to me. Everyone who's played that game and got through that specific exact moment throughout the 25 hours it takes to beat the game on average speaks to that exact same experience of the wheels finally turning within the brain and that signal finally clicking, that they get it, they understand it. And then the second half of the game, because it's about halfway through, it's intentionally placed there as a sort of real check marker, a skill check, if you will. You know, everything after that game is pretty much total genius and so much more enjoyable than the first half. Not that that is bad in any shape of the word, you know, but that second half of Sekiro is unbelievable, because at that point the game stops really holding your hand entirely and says, you know how to do this, you know the challenge we're about to give you, got to go and beat this now. and you know, they leave you to your own devices much more and just expect you to get through, and they raise the bar, and nothing exemplifies that more than the final boss fight, depending on, you know, the canon ending, let's say, of Ishii and the Sword Saint, which at the time, until Elden Ring, was regarded as the hardest the series has ever produced. And it was, and it felt victory within that fight felt more earned than any other boss in the entire series. It might not be my favorite, but when I came out the other side of the 3-phase boss that it was, victorious, I don't think I can think of many bosses in the entire series that felt more satisfying to beat. And I think that whole design philosophy of it being much more unforgiving, yet equally so much more satisfying to find victory, I think is why Sekiro has always been regarded then and still now as the one in the series that some treat as the hardest, but also some treat as the easiest. Because once you figured out that sort of the design choices that FromSoft were going for, and you understand how to win, how to find victory, in a lot of ways it becomes elementary being some of those bosses the second, third time round, because you've totally mastered the mechanic that FromSoft have put in front of you for the first time. And I think that's the absolute genius of it. You know, on top of, of course, the incredible art direction in this feudal Japan world, this sort of mystified feudal Japan, and of course the incredible music, which almost goes without saying, it's what FromSoft are known for. You know, these core tenets were still there from the Soul series, like the inclusion of bonfires or the sculptor's idols, if that's what you want to call them, and the general sort of philosophy of the challenge. The challenge was always there in the Soul series, and it's even more prevalent in Sekiro, and I think it's genius in so many ways that I've just described. Thank you so much for watching, listening to me waffle about the games that I love. Of course, this is the place to talk about them, discuss in the comments, ask me, ask everyone else about your thoughts and feelings towards Sekiro, FromSoft, or just anything you want with regards to this incredible industry. Thank you so much again, and I will see you on the next one. Have a good one.